If you're enjoying haunted UK fiction, please consider supporting the show on Patreon or Ko-fi. Simply search for Haunted UK Podcast. The swell of the waves was much higher now, and I could hear them crashing against the cliffs, white spray occasionally shooting high over the cliff top. The shrubs in the garden swayed in the wind. The scene was almost unrecognisable as the location of my walk earlier in the day. My eyes glanced to the left along the path that I had used. A sudden flash of lightning highlighted the way, and that's when I first saw her. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading the second and final part of Bleakmore, a Gothic Tale, which was sent in to us by Emma Hudairi. Emma has always had a fascination for ghost stories and supernatural tales, from hiding under the covers as a child reading Aidan Chambers' library books, to hiding behind cushions as an adult, watching paranormal investigations and listening to podcasts. Bleakmore, a Gothic Tale, is her tribute to some of the great Gothic horror tales of the past, and was written as a birthday gift for her daughter, Emily, during the first lockdown of the pandemic, a dark and uncertain time where many families found themselves divided by distance with no certainty of when they might be reunited. For Emma, this was a welcome creative release, and for her daughter, it was a great surprise and a personal connection despite the miles. Though the places in the story are entirely made up, they are based on places in Yorkshire, a beautiful part of the country where stunning coastline, historic buildings, and sometimes desolate landscapes lend themselves well to a fertile imagination and the possibilities of spooky goings-on. Get comfortable. Grab a little something to sip on. Perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way. And let's dive into the story. At last I reached the house, hair tousled and clothes scented with outdoors. I ate a cold lunch that had been left out for my return, combed my hair, and went to sit for an hour or so with my great-uncle. I'm pleased to say that there was no sign of Mrs. Armitstead that afternoon. I relaxed into my chair and told him of my walk and the things that I'd seen. It was strange to think that the feeble old man before me would once have traversed the same path, my footsteps in his, generation after generation. He did not stir today, and after an hour or so I decided to go and explore the grounds in more detail. On the way out, I passed Violet, who informed me that she would lay out a dinner for me later. I thanked her and walked along the front of the house and around the corner. Tall trees surrounded this area, and high above me crows cawed and flew. There was a small route leading to this area from the main drive to the house, and once round the corner, I could see that it opened to a large area sufficient for a cart to enter, offload its cargo to the kitchen or outbuildings, and then turn to leave. I noted a door to the far corner of this area, and as I walked to it, I recognized the Georgian window from the events of last night. I peered through and saw the pine table and furnishings. Sunlight flooded in now, and the room had taken on a busy and lived-in feel, with various jars, pots, and utensils laid out ready for use. I moved away from the window in case Violet returned, not wishing to scare her or invade her work. However, it was now clear that I had been to this area last night on whatever pretext. Sleepwalking, my rational mind concluded. There could be no other explanation. On the other side of the delivery area, below the high trees, were a couple of disused stables and an old outbuilding. The stables were empty, save for the remnants of their previous life. Hung around the walls were old leather saddles, straps and harnesses, and a series of horse brasses. Each had a coat of long-settled dust and cobwebs, confirming their abandonment many years prior. The attached outbuilding looked in a similar state of disuse. The window panes were coated with grime and age, and the door was closed tight, but not locked. A small push with shoulders as I held the latch saw it open. It was clear that the outbuilding, though now in a similar state of decline, had once been a workshop. A large wooden bench on the wall to the left was scattered with a variety of wood and metal tools. The smell of oil and grease hung in the air. I wandered around the surfaces, examining tools and prizing open little tins of nails, nuts and bolts, and other useful objects. In one corner was an old suitcase filled with sheet music. Beside it, a crate filled with old crockery, much of it chipped. A stack of metal buckets clanged as I bumped into them and sent them crashing noisily to the floor. Wood-wormed ladders hung from the walls, and in the furthest corner of the room I could see what looked like a small rocking horse, once gaily painted, but now chipped and uncared for. I could see it was dapple grey, with a cracked red leather saddle and faded red ribbons on its long mane and tail. Its shape and form had been beautifully carved, and it stood proudly astride a pair of curved rockers. Around its face and mane were a set of leather reins, and attached to these on its chest was a leather bib with something written on it. I leaned further into the gloom to see the inscription. Benjamin, I read, and even before I had finished the last syllable, I knew that the marble I had thought was in my trouser pocket was now rolling slowly and deliberately along the dusty floor towards the old horse, coming to rest at its hoof. I retrieved the marble and returned to my room. A hole in my pocket, surely. But on inspection I could find none. No matter. I had probably dislodged it at some point as I explored the boxes in the shed. I decided to make a further visit to check on my great-uncle. Mrs. Armitstead stood at the foot of the bed, watching the laboured rise and fall of Edgar Morgan's chest. I half thought of turning tail and leaving her to her roles, but she was already aware of my presence. Without turning, she spoke to me. "See how he breathes, sir," she said. "It won't be long now before he departs this world and goes to answer his Maker." I thought in passing how unsuited Mrs. Armitstead appeared to be to her role, with her silent, almost sinister presence and heavy words. I was sure that if she were nursing me in my final hours, she would be no comfort at all. But that was uncharitable of me. She had not told me before that she had built her life serving the community, from cradle to grave, as they say. She remained standing as I took to my usual chair. "What about you, Mrs. Armitstead?" I said. "Do you and your family live locally?" "I did," she replied, "but my family are now gone, and as for me, I return only to complete this final role." She was not an enthusiastic or passionate conversationalist. Her words were slow and measured. "Why this role?" I asked. "I've known Mr. Morgan for a long time, and our histories are intertwined," she continued. "When he leaves us, I will return home. As for family, my husband died many years ago now, and even before this, our beautiful daughter was taken from us. I didn't like to pry further, and we continued in silence for the remainder of my visit. I mused over her circumstances. I could see how the loss of her loved ones might lead to her dour persona, and I felt that I was able to see her more clearly. When the visit was over, I walked around the rest of the house and found a room lined with books. I chose one at random and read for a while about local plant life, but as the afternoon waned, my eyelids became heavy, and I fell asleep. Not for the first time at Bleakmore, I was awakened by an assault on my senses, although this time a happy one. The aromas of roast chicken, potatoes, and other welcome delights tempted me from my slumber. I sat sniffing the air like a dog seeking its treat. The light in the room was starting to fail as the remnants of evening sun weaved their way slowly around the building. I pulled myself from the cushions and strolled through to the dining room. I ate slowly, both to savour the tastes of the delicious meal and also to fill a little extra time before bed. I took a glass of wine also, and by the end of the meal I felt full and relaxed. By the time I'd wandered upstairs and taken a bath, night had fallen, and although it was still relatively early, the fresh air I had taken was catching up with me, and I was ready for bed. I settled into my blankets and fell immediately asleep. The day had been sunny and clear, but during the night a storm arrived, throwing rain against the windows and illuminating the sky with angry forks of light. I tried to ignore it, but its thunderous bangs and the howling of the wind down the chimney made this impossible. I lit my candle, pulled on my dressing gown, and went to sit by the window to see nature's battle playing out. The swell of the waves was much higher now, and I could hear them crashing against the cliffs, white spray occasionally shooting high over the cliff top. The shrubs in the garden swayed in the wind. The scene was almost unrecognisable as the location of my walk earlier in the day. My eyes glanced to the left along the path that I had used. A sudden flash of lightning highlighted the way, and that's when I first saw her. She moved at a quickened pace, seemingly trying to balance herself against the onslaught of the wind, her right elbow raised to shield her. She appeared to stumble on the uneven ground and occasionally almost lost her footing. She wore no coat, hat, or shawl, and I was fairly certain that she was barefoot. Around her slight frame, a sodden white shift billowed and clung in equal measures, and her long blonde hair blew wildly. Although there was a distance between us, I could tell she was quite young, perhaps in her mid-20s, and the paleness of her attire continued through to her skin. She must have been freezing and drenched, and could clearly not be in her right mind. I considered opening the window a fraction to shout to her, but any words I offered would be drowned by the maelstrom of the night. There was only one solution. I threw on my trousers and coat, grabbed a blanket from my bed, and ran from my room to assist her. So quickly did I run that I almost lost my footing on the stairs and in the hall. I bumped heavily into a sideboard. Soon I was in the room leading the French windows and patio, and I tried to fling them open. The storm resisted my feeble attempts, harsh wind blowing the wooden frame tight shut again. I braved myself and pushed harder, this time managing to squeeze through the opening onto the patio. The noise outside was almost deafening. Leaves and pieces of twig flew past me, and I shielded myself with my arm as I ventured out into the madness. As I descended the 3 steps to the pathway, I could just make her out. Still on the cliff top, she had now reached the start of the lawn. We continued on our courses at right angles to each other, both heading towards a common point. She reached it before I did. I was getting close now, only a few feet away. I could see her bloodied feet and shaking form, still jerking in the winds that surrounded her as her balance faltered. She had stopped and was facing forwards towards the turbulent ocean. Then she turned her head and looked towards me. The terror and sorrow on her face stopped me in my tracks, and I was powerless to move for a second. Her astonishing beauty took my breath away and stopped my racing heart. And even as she turned back towards the sea, I knew what her intention was. I dropped the saturated blanket and ran forth again, arm outstretched, to try and grab her. But before I could, her chest went forward, her head flew back, and she fell from the cliff top into the abyss of the raging ocean. I cannot describe the horror I felt. She had been within my grasp, and I had failed her. Her soundless descent into the depths of the hellish tide echoed through my brain. I stood as close to the edge as I dare go and sought her out amongst the angry waves. But she was gone. I stood alone, staring blindly past my feet into the spitting surf below, desolate and appalled at my failure, the wind buffeting my hair and coat. And through the corner of my eye, I saw that infernal marble roll slowly from somewhere behind me to rest at my feet at the cliff's edge. I cannot say for sure how long I remained there, marble at my feet, entranced by the waves and the roar of the wind, but at some point my senses returned and I started to walk back to the house. I left the marble where it lay, but collected the drenched and muddy blanket and navigated the path with nothing but the light of the moon to guide me. The windows of the house, save for mine where a candle still shone, were milky black in their darkness. The heinous storm was reducing to routine wind and rain, and the shrubs no longer twisted in the borders. My gait was heavy and laboured. Indeed, my whole body felt anchored to the earth, each step taken a monumental move towards freedom from the horrors of the night. I entered the house and climbed with considerable effort to my room. I dried as much of myself as possible, changed into a fresh set of clothes, and lay upon the bed waiting for dawn. I napped for a few minutes, here and there, but mainly I listened. Listened to the weather outside the window, and the groans and creaks within the body of the house itself. I had not had the strength to draw the curtains on my return, and as dawn started to arrive, it crept surreptitiously into the corners of the room, cautious and muted, as it signalled the imminent arrival of the sun on the horizon. I took my coat and started to walk. By the time I reached the nearest market town, some 2 to 3 hours later, the day was fully formed. Early rays of sun danced over the remaining diamonds of dew and elaborate cobwebs. It was still early, but the town was starting to wake up and go about its daily business. I followed the carts to the market square, and after seeking direction from a tradesman, I made my way to the police station. I explained the night's events to the officer on the desk, and explained that I had done all I could to prevent the young woman from taking her own life. I told him of the terrible storm and waiting until dawn to start my journey. He took the details and was good enough not to interrupt until I had finished my account. When I was done, he laid down his pencil and studied me carefully. He thanked me for the account I had given, but I could see there was something wrong. I asked him what it was. He looked at me again with a mixture of doubt and concern. "It's just that there are 1 or 2 inconsistencies with your story, sir," he replied after a short pause. "Inconsistencies?" I responded incredulously. "There are no inconsistencies. What I have told you is exactly as it happened in full detail." As I spluttered, he remained calm and gave me the same look. "Let's start with the storm, sir. There was no storm last night. The sea along this entire stretch of coastline was calm, and the weather was mild." "No, it wasn't," I countered. "The rain was monstrous and fully drenching. The winds were blowing a gale, and the sea was as far from a mill pond as I have ever seen." He looked at me again. "Sir, whilst I don't doubt that you have a belief in what you're saying, it cannot be true. You have told me yourself that you have been walking through this storm-affected landscape since dawn." "I have. I truly have." "Then, sir, look at your shoes. They are dry and dusty save for the last remnants of dew. If you had walked for so long across such a soaked area, they would be wet and coated in mud. And your coat. It would have brushed against plants and nettles and tree bark, and their dampness and some of their colour would have rubbed off on it. But the fabric is clean and dry. And your hands, they must have reached out to open gates and cross stiles. They should be dirty and grubby, but they appear to be almost fully clean. I looked at each aspect of my appearance as he said it, and he was right. I did not have the clothing of a man who had walked at length through some storm-sodden countryside. To all intents and purposes, I could have walked to the station from the other side of town. He looked at my growing realization and took pity on me. To be fair, sir, the cliffs on that bit of coastline are high, and over the centuries there have been tales of suicide and accidents. You know my reservations. I think it entirely possible you have had some kind of vivid dream. But to be on the safe side, I'll send word to the fishing communities and ask them to keep an eye out for this young woman. We'll not be finding her easily if she has gone into the sea, but there's always a chance she'll come back to shore or get caught up in a net. We concluded our business, and I left the station, unnerved and suddenly feeling very weary. Most of the market was now set up and trading, and I wandered through it at a slow pace, browsing local produce and homemade crafts, my face inquisitive, but my mind elsewhere. I decided to buy cheese and bread and sat on a wall overlooking the stalls. I had not realized how hungry I had been. With the events of last night, whatever they were, and the exertions of the walk had left me famished. I ate until I was full, then found a tree under which I could snooze as I planned my journey back to Bleakmore House. The long walk back was more difficult. The sense of urgency had left my step, and a heaviness pulled at my very core. In time I reached the turning to Bleakmore, and I had again begun the trek down the old drive. Gone was the sense of intrigue and adventure of 2 days past. My weariness and lack of sleep ate away at me, and I longed to lie down and rest. Finally, I could see the house before me. At first glance it appeared calm and still, but as I neared the front door, Violet came rushing out to meet me. "Oh, sir," she implored. "Wherever have you been? I've been searching for you everywhere." I could tell by the look on her face that something had happened. "What is it, Violet?" I asked. "It's Mr. Morgan, sir," she replied. "I'm sorry to have to tell you that he passed away an hour or so ago. I'm so sorry for your loss, sir." She stood staring up at me, unsure of what to do next. "Thank you, Violet," I responded with a hollow tone. "I'm sorry that I was not here." She turned around and we started to walk back to the house together. As Violet went about her business, I went upstairs to pay my last respects to Edgar Morgan. As I entered the room, I saw his slight and shrunken frame, the bedding smoothed and tidied around him, his eyes closed and secured with coins, and his mouth slightly open. His face had taken a youthful appearance and, save for the coins, he might still be asleep. I heard the floorboards creak behind me, and Mrs. Armistead entered the room. "I'll be leaving presently," she informed me. "My role here is done. I have delivered Mr. Morgan from this life to the next. I can only pray now that he is where he deserves to be and that his actions in life will be considered in full when he meets his Maker." She stood at the foot of the bed and looked at my great-uncle one last time. With a nod of the head towards me, she turned and left the room. I waited a moment or two, then I turned and left also. The next few days passed by in a blur. Mr. Douglas visited to confirm that I was now the owner of Bleakmore House, and a man of not inconsiderable means. My great-uncle had also had the foresight to make my provision through Mr. Douglas for his funeral, and a date was set. I saw no more of Mrs. Armistead, and Violet carried out her duties quietly and efficiently. On the morning of the funeral, I donned a black suit and tie, thoughtfully provided by Mr. Douglas. He had provided transport also, and I made my way back to town where the Reverend Kennaway was to conduct the service at St. Mary's. My great-uncle had left the house a few days prior and would be brought to the church by the undertaker. I walked the sunny path to the church entrance and went inside. The warmth of the sun's rays instantly snuffed out the cool shadows inside. To say the church was empty would be unfair. Reverend Kennaway waited by the door and welcomed me in, and then I saw two other figures waiting patiently. Violet seated on one side of the aisle, and Mrs. Armistead on the other. An elderly gentleman sat ahead of me on the church organ. Presently Edgar Morgan arrived and the ceremony got under way. After the service ended, we walked to an open plot on the outside of the church, and here he was laid to rest. As the interment came to an end, I shook Reverend Kennaway's hand and thanked him for the service. Violet walked back down the path to the church's main gate to start her journey back to Bleakmore, and Mrs. Armistead went on her way, walking on the grass alongside the church and round the corner to a second gate hidden beyond. It occurred to me that I hadn't yet thanked her properly for the care she had given to my great-uncle, so I hurried off in the same direction to catch her, but to no avail. I turned the corner, but she had already departed down one of several side streets that followed on from the road beyond the gate. I wandered back to the church and found the Reverend Kennaway tidying books and preparing to close up. "Excuse me," I said. "Whilst I'm in town, I'd like to find old Mrs. Armistead. Do you know where she is?" "Hannah Armistead? I do indeed," he smiled, the solemnity of the service now removed from his demeanour. "It's this way. Follow me." We walked the same length of grass alongside the church, round the corner and towards the gate. "Here she is." He pointed as we came to a stop. I still could not see her, and followed his hand. My gaze met a tall grey stone, moss just starting to frame its outer edges. "In memory of Clarence William Armistead, died the 27th of February. Also, Hannah, wife of the above, died 11th of November, aged 82 years. In remembrance also of Elizabeth, beloved daughter of Clarence and Hannah, died 18th of May, aged 25 years. Angels alone know where she rests in the depths of the Lord's mighty oceans." "Been doing a spot of family history, have we?" he asked, as I looked from the stone to him, and then back to the stone. "Perhaps," I said, feeling my way cautiously. "What can you tell me about her?" I was greatly relieved that he didn't ask me how I had come by her name, and in his usual manner he carried on. "She was the mother of Edgar's wife, Elizabeth," he continued. "When Elizabeth married Edgar, he took her to Bleakmore, and she was rarely seen again in town thereafter. By all accounts, she was a beautiful young woman and well-liked. But there was talk after her marriage of madness and confinement by Edgar for her own safety. I heard that one night Elizabeth escaped from her room and made her way to the cliff top. Local legend says there was a storm raging that night, strong enough to sink an entire fleet. Whether she knew what she was doing or whether she was overpowered by the demons in her mind, no one knew. But regardless, she fell from the cliffs into the crashing sea below, and her remains were never found. Edgar Morgan later told the local constable that he had no idea Elizabeth had left the house. He had assisted her to her bed and left her sleeping. He was in the process of retiring himself when he saw her from the window, but he was too far away to do anything when he saw her fall. He became a virtual recluse at Bleakmore from that day." "And Mrs. Armistead?" I ventured. "Ah, Mrs. Armistead," he mused. "There was a force to be reckoned with. Of course, I only knew her towards the very end of her life, but I'm certain there was no love lost between her and Edgar Morgan. She spun tales of brutality against her daughter at Edgar's hand. She even suggested that he had denied her access to the household and that Elizabeth was with child. No evidence of that, of course. and certainly no record at St. Mary's of a baptism, so local gossip put this down to personal anguish after such tragic events. I remember her telling me once that she would never rest until the full truth of what had happened at Bleakmore was known. But the good Lord catches up with all of us in the end. Indeed, I replied, and turned back to the headstone. Reverend Kennaway bade me farewell, as he had a parishioner he was intending to visit, and I was left alone once more with Mrs. Armistead. My thoughts were reeling. Arthur H. Douglas had informed me that Edgar Morgan wished to share a family secret with me. To this point, I had thought that it was the family history relating to my mother, who I now knew was Edgar's niece. But in my heart, I knew there was more. What had happened at Bleakmore? What was the secret that Edgar Morgan had wanted to unburden himself of before his passing? What had Samuel Biddle uncovered all those years ago? For I now felt sure Edgar Morgan was involved. There was more of this story to unfold, of that I was certain, and although I didn't know it at the time, all would soon become clear. I reached out and touched the top of the stone. "Don't worry, Mrs. Armistead," I whispered. "If there is more of the story to tell, I will find it." It may have just been fancy, but in an instant the day became warmer, and I heard the bird song in the branches of the churchyard's old trees for the first time. When the thunder woke me that night, I knew what to expect. I lit my candle, grabbed a blanket from my bed, and made my way to the window. I pulled back the heavy curtains and sat in the chair, letting my eyes grow accustomed to the storm-soaked darkness, and focused on the ragged moonlight dancing ferociously on the heaving waves. It seemed to take forever before I saw her to my left on the cliff path, her pathetic, soaked appearance and jerking movements. But this time, she was not alone. He was taller than her, and now I saw that her elbow was raised, not to protect her from the onslaught of the storm, but because he held it tightly. Her jerked movements and stumbles were not solemn, storm-related, or due to the fact that she was barefoot. She was struggling to escape, but with brute force he dragged her onwards without mercy to her fate. The struggle continued until they reached the cliff top, and he forced her to face outwards to the sea. She turned for a moment to look at him, and then he pushed her with great force between her shoulder blades. Her chest pushed forwards with the vigor of the assault, and her head flew back. With no further recourse to aid or leniency, she was sent knowingly to her death in the hellish waters below. He remained standing for a moment, then turned to face the house. As he marched resolutely up the pathway towards the entrance I had used just days before, the winds tormented his coat-tails, and the rays of the moon illuminated his face. He was much younger now than when I had first laid eyes on him, but in my mind there was no doubt. It was Edgar Morgan. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I had to leave that haunted chamber. I pulled on my dressing gown and left the room with a tight chest and a feeling of breathlessness. In the darkened corridor outside my room the storm continued, although now distant, shouting replaced wind and rain. I knew from my previous experience that the same ghostly horrors were being replayed in the kitchen. I stumbled in candlelight towards the stairs as I reached the top. I looked to my right, and there she was at the far end of the corridor. Elizabeth Morgan, pale and ethereal in the moonlight, her white shift dripping seawater. I was unable to move or breathe. All I could hear was the drumming of my heart. And as she moved slowly toward me, her face etched with grief and fear, her palm outstretched trying to save me, I knew he stood behind me. I felt the hard push between my shoulder blades, and I plunged forward and fell down the stairs. As I reached the bottom, bruised and insensible, the last sound I heard was the marble, bouncing slowly with a clear, hollow resonance down each step. And the last thing I saw in the moonlight before my eyes closed was this abominable piece of glass rolling, and coming to rest by my face. Thanks to the ministrations of Violet and the local doctor, I was able to fully recover, and after a period of several days in bed, I was able to move round the house again. I was very lucky, the doctor had said, to come away from such a trip with only cuts and bruises. And I was happy for them to think I had missed my step, because what else could I say? With many of the house's secrets now known to me, I was no longer troubled by phantom intrusions in the night, but the marble remained a mystery. Several times now I had found it in the same place where I fell and put it back in my pocket. But however many times this happened, I couldn't stop it from continuing its unfinished business. It was now 3 weeks since my fall, and here I was again, in the hall, at the foot of the stairs, retrieving the marble. Dusk was casting its gloomy spell around me, and shadows were building in the crevices of furniture and doorways. Already the light was failing. I had to end the torment that remained. I remembered the old rocking horse, took a deep breath, and called out to him on a hunch. "Benjamin! Benjamin, is that you?" I paused, suddenly feeling foolish. What was I possibly hoping to achieve? Still I continued. "If you are here with me now, Benjamin, if this is your marble, please come forward. You have nothing to fear from me. Any pain you once felt is now long gone." At first I thought it was a trick of the light, an awareness more than anything substantial, but as my eyes strained, the gloaming appeared to form into a shape and then a figure. He stepped forth slowly, cautiously, from the shadows that had created him, and walked towards me. He was a young child, perhaps 3 or 4 years old at most. He wore short trousers to the knee with a matching jacket and a shirt with a large scalloped collar. His socks were long, and his small shoes were made of leather with ribboned bows at the front. His clothes were dusty and cobwebbed, and his skin had a greyish-green hue. His eyes looked heavy with sadness, and dark circles below them exposed a level of heartbreak and torment that should not have been present in one so young. I had nothing to fear from this poor wraith. All I could offer him now was peace. "It's time, Benjamin," I said. "Take me to your resting place." I followed the shadowed figure out into the emerging night and waited until he came to a standstill beneath one of the tall trees at the side of the house. I found a spade in the outbuildings and started to dig. After a short while of heavy exertion, I hit what appeared to be a rug, and when I dug further to investigate and opened it out, I found the skeletal remains of a child, odd fragments of clothing clinging to bone and dried-out tendon, an old tin soldier by his side. The remains were removed in due course and buried with Hannah and Clarence Armitstead. An additional piece was added to the headstone. Also Benjamin, beloved son of Elizabeth and grandson of Clarence and Hannah. May angels guide you to us at the end of your long journey. I had lost all taste for Bleakmore House and its past, and after arranging for a respectable final payment to be made to Violet, I closed it up and walked away. I had a good income now, and was in a position to control my own destiny. And anyone who may by chance have seen me walk for the last time down that long and dusty drive might not have thought anything of it. But if they had watched my journey more carefully, maybe they would have seen me stoop to pick up a shiny old marble that had rolled out in front of me. And if they had watched further, might they have seen 2 shadows, one long, one shorter, walking away in the afternoon sun? And so, dear listeners, my story ends. Almost. Since that day I have wandered the country at my leisure, and never have I returned to Bleakmore House. For all I know, it may have fallen into the sea, and if it has, the world will be better for it. I see you shuffling, smiling at the horrors of my tale, delighted in your own sense of unease as we approach the end of All Hallows Eve. But remember what I have said. Whilst I thank you for your applause and generous bonhomie, may I remind you that every word I have spoken is true. What's that? You don't believe me? Then tell me why, even now as you delight at my story, a marble is rolling slowly past your feet towards me. See how its colours shine in the glow of the embers. Come forth, Benjamin. Come forth and face those who doubt your existence. Step from the shadows and stand beside me. My dear listeners, there is no need to run or scream. A mere child is all that stands before you. Yes, his pallor is monstrous, and his clothes are tainted with dust, but his soul is pure, and he has no command over his appearance. Return to the fire, I beseech you. Alas, Benjamin, I fear they will not be returning. No, mind. It is thrills and excitement they seek, not truth and substance. They are too young yet to have learned the responsibilities of the world. But you have nothing to fear, my dear child, for I have pledged to walk with you until such time when my life ends, and the angels and I can return you safely back to the arms of your mother and her family. Come, Benjamin, gather your marble, and let us continue our journey. That brings us to the end of this two-part episode featuring the story Bleakmore, a Gothic Tale by Emma Hudairi. We truly hope you enjoyed this atmospheric tale. If you would like to hear more from Emma, stay tuned to the Haunted UK Fiction podcast, as we have another of her stories to release at a later date. Emma is also currently working on a modern short story that blends the everyday mundane with the supernatural. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.